This is a real thing that happened to me, and I'm telling it as plainly as I can. It's messy, it's personal, and it started in the one place that used to feel safest, our lake cabin in Chelan. The betrayal hit me the moment my tires crunched onto the gravel, and I saw the door standing open, my brass cabin key glinting on the porch table beside a sweating glass of rosé, because my ex, Ivy, had moved into our lake place with her new man. The August heat made the water a sheet of hammered silver, and laughter floated from inside like I'd stumbled onto a party that had been waiting to humiliate me. We were all gathered there because I was supposed to spend my 2 days off resetting my head after a grim week of night shifts at Harborview Medical Center, and because Ivy knew that, she chose that weekend to rub my face in the fact that I'd been replaced. Sunblock, wet towels, and an unfamiliar pair of men's boots framed the entry. The cabin smelled like sunscreen and sliced limes. Ours and not ours anymore. If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel. Tell us where you're from and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. I'm Elena, 34, and most nights I try to keep strangers alive long enough for a chance, the unglamorous center of an ER shift where the clock doesn't mean what it should. People think nurses are used to chaos and pain. The truth is we build little shelves inside ourselves for the hurt we can't afford to feel in the moment, and we place things carefully on them. The lake cabin was supposed to be my shelf. My father left it to me when he died, cedar siding going soft at the corners, a dock that creaks like an old man's knee, a view that makes your lungs feel bigger. It sits near Manson on the north shore of Lake Chelan, a half hour past the fruit stands and the Welcome to Chelan sign that, if you're like me, means put your phone away and count the brush strokes on the hills. It was always mine, separate property, recorded as such with the Chelan County auditor years before I met Ivy. The deed was one piece of paper I kept tape-protected in a folder with my dad's obituary and a postcard he once mailed me from Twisp with a goofy drawing of a fish. Ivy, for a while, loved it even more than I did, because she loved anything that made her look like she belonged in a magazine. Barefoot on the dock, wine glass in sunset light, captions like, "Where Time Stands Still." She acted at a black box theater in Capitol Hill, called herself a multidisciplinary artist when it got her grants, and could charm a free tiramisu out of a server in under a minute at the pink door. I met her after a night shift when my brain was humming like a refrigerator. She asked to bum a light, saw I didn't smoke, laughed, and asked if I always looked that shell-shocked. I told her I'd just watched someone's life turn on a dime. She said, she could turn me on a dime. It was cheesy. It worked. The good part lasted, I think, 9 months. She was clever and mean in the same breath. A little bit like picking up a cat who tolerated you because you had the warmest lap. She didn't ask what I'd seen in Trauma 4. She took my hand and dragged me to a dim bar, said, "You need to feel human, not heroic." At the cabin, we counted satellites and lied to each other about forever. We named the big pine by the water cathedral and promised to keep a logbook of the birds we could identify. We never made it past scrub jays and mallards. In Seattle, she lured my thrift store lamp collection into becoming a grown-up's apartment. At the lake, she claimed the cedar dresser, the good knives, and the hammock. She also claimed my attention like oxygen, and when she didn't get it, she punished. During a late spring run to Chelan, I came back from Blueberry Hills with a pie and heard her on the phone telling someone, "She's decent, not special. She's lucky to have me." When she saw me, she grinned like it was a joke, said she was rehearsing lines. I wanted to ask for the script. The fracture that widened into a canyon happened in July. I came home to Capitol Hill after a 12-hour to find a stranger's leather jacket on the back of our chair and Ivy in the kitchen, flushed and glittering like she'd been told a secret and was deciding whether to share it. She introduced him as Cal. "Short for California?" I tried. He smirked and said, "Short for Calvin." His handshake was the dry, flat kind of a man who thinks he's in charge. A contractor, he said. Builds decks on the lake, knows everyone from Wapato Point to Mill Bay. He told me he loved our cabin. I told him he'd never seen it. Ivy squeezed his arm, and something low and sour burned in my stomach. A week later, Ivy and I agreed to take some space. Not a breakup. She said that word like it tasted like pennies, but a pause. She'd stay with a friend in Belltown. I could have the cabin that weekend. I checked the Harbor View schedule twice. I tossed my bag in the car after a night shift and drove east, I-90 unspooling in the dark, then Highway 97 with the sky going gray over the river, the vineyards turning green in that powdery way they do from a distance. I rolled down the windows and tried not to think. The first thing I saw at the cabin was that brass key on the porch beside the rosé. The second thing I saw was Cal, shirtless, tan line at his shoulders, like he wore a tool belt even to the lake. The third was Ivy, wearing my U-District hoodie and a smile that said she'd rehearsed this. "We didn't think you'd come this early," she said, like I was late to a script note and she was the director. The humiliation was fine grain, like sand you get in your shoes and can't shake out. You erase a person in stages. First you write over the calendar, then over the drawer space, and finally over the words you let them call you. "We?" I asked. "Ivy, this is my place." Cal had the look of a man who knows the sheriff by first name. He spread his hands. "We've been here a week. Utilities in our name. We're taking good care of it. Place needed a man's touch." He shot a glance at the sagging porch step as if his presence alone had improved it. Ivy laughed. "We're reorganizing, Len. It's actually kind of a win-win. You're never out here. We are." I'd pulled up only halfway. My car idled, AC whining, Tacoma plates baking toward hot. The sight lines rearranged themselves. My father's grill, the hammock, the dock, the canoe, a new cooler that wasn't ours. I had a bag of groceries in the passenger seat, limes, a cheap pineapple, tortilla chips, and a box of White Claw that now looked like a prop for someone else's party. Inside, a Bluetooth speaker thumped something that didn't have bass when I had last loved this place. I could have shouted. I could have called them squatters and told them to get out. I could have called the Chelan County Sheriff. In fact, Ivy did that for me when I walked past her and tried my key anyway. They'd changed the lock. She put on the performance I'd watched her give strangers. "Officer, my ex is here. She's unstable. I'm just trying to de-escalate." She was so good at that word, de-escalate, like everything was a talent show and the prize went to the girl who made you seem crazy. A deputy came, slow, sunburned, polite. He asked me to keep my voice down. He warned all of us to take it to court if it was a property dispute. Cal put a fatherly hand on his shoulder and said, "We know the drill." I spent that night in a room at Campbell's Resort, listening to laughter from the pool and the murmur of couples deciding whether to split a slice of something sweet. I'm not a crier, but I cried then, quiet, face toward the window so the night wouldn't have to watch me. I thought about my dad. The whole thing felt like someone trespassing on a grave. In the morning, I drove to the courthouse in Wenatchee and sat outside on the steps with a coffee from Mela while I Googled until my phone burned my hand. Washington's a community property state, but inheritance is separate unless you commingle. And the cabin had never been commingled. The deed was in my name alone. I paid for the roof with money from a separate account. The power bill was on autopay from me. Ivy had done a couple of IKEA runs, but IKEA is not an interest in real property. Still, the law gets weird where feelings live. I walked my coffee back to the car, stared at my reflection in the glass, and told that tired version of me, "You are not crazy, you are correct." That week, a woman at my bank in Chelan called to say there had been an odd inquiry about my property tax history. Her voice had that careful bank tone, the kind that tries to be neutral and comes off like fear wearing a tie. I went cold. I pulled records from the county and found a memorandum of interest filed 3 days earlier, claiming Ivy had an equitable interest in the cabin by virtue of a domestic partnership and contributions to improvements. It was boilerplate, badly written, full of the kind of words that bullies think sound like laws. It clouded title enough to make a casual buyer hesitate. It was a dare. I spent my next day off with an attorney in Wenatchee named Lydia Coker, a woman whose haircut said she didn't have patience for nonsense and whose legal pad had an elegant hand. She read the memorandum, skimmed the deed, nodded at my folder with the obituary and postcard like she was glad I'd brought my whole heart, and then drew a box around the word separate property. "We'll move to strike the memo," she said. "Quiet title. We'll also give notice to quit. What they're doing amounts to tenancy at sufferance at best, unlawful detainer at worst. What if they don't leave? Then we make it someone else's problem." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She laid out an option I hadn't considered because I'm a nurse, not a general in a property war. You can sell a house subject to an occupant. Some buyers prefer it because they can handle the eviction with their own counsel and contractors, cash buyers especially. Title could close once the cloud was lifted. It would be legal, clean, and surgical. No fights in driveways, no more deputy mediations, just a wire hitting my account, and a new owner with a different style of patience. "You want them out," Lydia said, tapping her pen. "And you want your life back. You can do both." I drove back to Seattle with the sky bruising into evening over Stevens Pass and started making phone calls. The first was to a neighbor at the lake, Pam, who knew every story that had ever happened within a mile radius. She'd seen Ivy and Cal arrive with a U-Haul, she said. She'd seen them carry in a big TV and a canoe that wasn't ours and a bassinet. "Don't freak out," she added quickly. They borrowed it for a friend visiting with a baby. The second call was to a cash buyer I found through a friend of a friend, a woman named Kendra, who flipped cabins and kept her promises. When I told her my situation, she made a sound I recognized from the ER, someone taking a problem and turning it over like a puzzle they can solve. "Text me the address and your lawyer's name," she said. "We'll set it up, but you have to be okay with what happens. People like your ex tend to think houses are stages. They don't exit gracefully." I thought about the key on the table, the glass of rosé, the man in my driveway announcing himself like he carried my title in his pocket. I swallowed. "I'm okay with it," I said. "I want them to learn that a stage is a place you stand until the lights go out." The plan felt like cold water after a heat wave. We'd file to strike the memorandum. We'd list the cabin as is, subject to occupant, quietly, to Kendra alone. We would close the moment the title was clean. Then a notice to quit would arrive not from me, but from the new owner with a bottomless appetite for compliance. I lay awake that night in my Capitol Hill apartment, the city humming below, and imagined Ivy's face when she learned the ground she'd tried to take from me had been sold out from under her, legally, calmly, with signatures and stamps. I had one more thing to do before any of that. The cabin had a locked cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside were the things my father hadn't trusted to a bank. The original deed, a Polaroid of me at 10 holding a fish so big it obscured half my face, and a letter I hadn't opened because I'm superstitious about endings. I needed the deed. I needed to walk into that cabin one more time, not to fight, but to retrieve my past from people who were using it as decor. So I drove back over the mountains on my next break, arriving at dusk, when the water is the color of a bruise and the insects make one long chord of sound. I parked on the shoulder, took the path through the trees I used as a kid to sneak down to the dock, and listened for laughter. There was music. There were voices. There was Cal telling a story about a deck railing that wouldn't code. There was Ivy, laughing a little too brightly. Her audience laugh, I used to call it, the one that said she was making someone feel like a hero. I waited until I could count their silhouettes in the window, then slipped around to the bedroom window, which has always been sticky on its track. My hands remembered the angle. I slid it up and eased myself in, heart beating in my throat, a burglar in my father's house. I wanted to be invisible, but I wanted the chest. My past was in there, and if I left it behind, I was leaving myself. I crossed the floor, pressed my palm to the lid, and a phone vibrated on the dresser behind me. It lit the room with a cold square of light. My name filled the screen, an old photo of me smiling at the Fremont Solstice Parade behind it, the caller ID that read Elena. The vibration continued, louder because it was the only thing I couldn't control. My phone, in my pocket, receiving a call I hadn't made, from a number that wasn't mine. I froze, breath stopped, hand still on the cedar lid as footsteps turned down the hall. I didn't breathe. The footsteps hesitated outside the door because whoever it was, Cal, by the weight and the swagger in the floorboards, heard the vibration too. He knocked, loud and jaunty. "Babe, where's your phone?" His hand tried the handle. I stood there, a voice pressed into silence, the way you press gauze to a wound to keep it from spilling. In the ER, I've learned that seconds can be buildings you hide inside. I hid. The chest was unlocked. I knew it by the way my father's cheap brass latch always slides without catching. I eased the lid, slipped out the deed and the letter, and slid the lid shut just as the doorknob jiggled harder. "Babe," Cal called again, "your ex is calling you again. Do you want me to answer and tell her to stop being a stalker?" Two things upended my lungs. He had Ivy's phone with my name still saved as a heart, and he wanted to be the one who answered. That's who he was, a man who wanted to speak for you. I pocketed the papers, crossed to the window, slid, and skated down the siding like a teenager who remembered where every nail stuck up. I hit the earth, ran bent double along the path through the pines, and only breathed when the water opened up ahead. I crouched by Cathedral, the big pine, and pressed my forehead to the bark until the sound of my heart matched the 1,000 small zippers of insects. I'd done it. I had the deed. I had whatever my father had left me in that sealed envelope with my name on it. My fingers trembled so hard I could barely lift it. The letter wasn't long. Dad had written it the night he knew the cancer wasn't going to negotiate. He apologized for nothing. My father was not a man who thought love and apology were siblings. He told me the cabin was where he'd been happiest, and that he'd left it to me because he trusted me to keep the water in view. He told me to never let anyone tell me I was lucky to have them. "You are my best," he wrote, and then, because he never could leave the last line alone, "and you are yours." I put the letter back in the envelope, tucked it under my shirt where the paper felt like a second sternum, and walked the path to my car without looking back. The next week moved like a machine. Lydia filed the quiet title action and a motion to strike the memorandum Ivy had recorded. We set a hearing date in Chelan County Superior Court. Kendra and I signed a purchase and sale agreement at a Starbucks on First Hill, the kind of setting that makes legal documents feel like you're confirming a brunch. Her pen was expensive and fast. We agreed on a number that made my lungs loosen for the first time in a month. Closing would be contingent on title clearing and nothing else. Kendra would accept the cabin as is, occupant and all. I texted Pam to brace for a change next door. Pam texted back a line that made me smile. "I'll bring lemonade the day your life becomes yours again." Ivy, of course, noticed. She noticed because even in this new story she was writing about herself, the woman wronged by a controlling nurse, she was still obsessing over my feed. I didn't post much, but Redfin did. The quiet listing pinged nearby agents, and one of them drove by slow, and Ivy is the kind of person who reads the world for signs she can turn into applause. I got the first text from her at 10:13 a.m. on a Thursday. "Are you kidding me?" She followed it with a selfie in front of the cabin, chin high, middle finger up, captioned, "My house, my rules," with Cal grinning behind her like a sophomore who'd just been told the police can't actually do anything if it's a civil matter. I was tempted to reply with a screenshot of the deed. I was tempted to quote my father, to say, "You are not my luck." Instead, I sent her the only thing that felt right. "You'll be receiving legal papers soon. Please direct any questions to my attorney. I put my phone face down and went to work where people were bleeding, where text messages meant room 5 blood gas, not taunts. The ER does not care about your property war. People are on fire and falling and breaking and praying. You put your hands on their bodies and you make a gate for the pain to go through. The hearing was small and plain. You could fold it up and put it in your pocket if you wanted to remember how order looks when the heat is off. The judge was a woman with a face like a lake in winter. Lydia spoke in the calm tone of a person who will not be hurried. She presented the deed, the bank records, the affidavit about the separate property account, and the photographs of the cabin as it had always been mine. Ivy came with Cal, who wore a going-to-court plaid shirt and looked impressed with himself. Ivy spoke about contributions and sweat equity and a domestic partnership that had made us a family unit. She'd brought photographs of herself sanding the porch railing, like doing a chore on a Saturday was a down payment on my birthright. The judge listened, tapped her pen on the bench when Ivy got theatrical, and finally said, "The memorandum is stricken. Title is quieted in the petitioner's name. Any tenancy issues will be addressed in the proper forum." Cal's jaw worked. Ivy squeezed his knee beneath the table and called out to me as I left the aisle, "You can't sell a home out from under people." Lydia didn't look at them. She touched my elbow the way a good chef props a plate so it doesn't slide, and walked me out into the Wenatchee air that felt like borrowed time. We scheduled closing for the following Friday at the Chicago Title Office in Wenatchee, a place with the bland comfort of beige chairs and a candy bowl that tastes like every closing before yours. Kendra's wire instructions went to her banker. My account numbers blinked on paper that made me superstitious. I checked everything 3 times because in my world, a wrong digit can mean a life goes a direction it shouldn't. I slept with my phone under my pillow, not because I wanted to be accessible, but because I wanted to wake up if my future called. Ivy and Cal did not go quiet. They changed the locks again and stuck a "No Trespassing, Tenants Only" sign on the porch like a toddler taping "Keep Out" to a bedroom door. They posted on Facebook about predatory landlords and weaponized exes. Cal printed a lease, backdated no less, with his own company's logo at the top, a company that, as it turns out, was not in good standing with the Department of Revenue. They were creating a narrative, and they were so snug inside it that they forgot how paper has to meet law before it turns into anything but a prop. On Thursday night, the eve of closing, Kendra called me. Her voice was all business, a scalpel at the edge of something complicated. "Heads up," she said. "Your ex recorded something new." I stood at my kitchen counter in Seattle with a bowl of cherries and the window cracked to the warm city night and felt like I was back on the courthouse steps with coffee burning my hand. "What now?" I asked. "An unrecorded lease presented to the eviction resolution program with a demand for mediation. It's cute. It's intended to stall. It doesn't prevent the sale, but it means she thinks she's about to get steamrolled. And when people like her think that, they do dramatic things." I pressed my thumb into a cherry until it burst, juice bleeding onto my palm like a bad metaphor. "So we can close?" I asked. "We can still sell it out from under them?" "We can close," Kendra said. "And once we do, my counsel will handle everything. Tomorrow morning at 10, Chicago Title. Be on time." I left Seattle when the sky was still the color of dishwater and the crows were arguing on the wire behind my building. US 2 east past Monroe and Sultan, the coffee in my travel mug going from hot to brave to lukewarm, the cascades sharpening out of the morning. I kept the envelope with my father's letter in the glove box because I'd learned to keep a physical thing within reach when my mind tried to noodle off into loops. A paper anchor. Leavenworth was just setting out its Bavarian bread signs when I rolled through. I watched a baker snap a picture of a pretzel for Instagram and thought about how every story people tell about themselves is a decision. Mine was going to be written in signatures and stamps today, not selfies. Chicago Title in Wenatchee sits in a low office building that could be a dentist, a funeral home, or a bank, depending on the candy in the lobby. This one had peppermints. Lydia was already there, a gray suit and a binder that made me feel like I'd brought the right adult to school. Kendra arrived 2 minutes later in jeans, a blazer, and sneakers that probably cost more than my first car. She carried the confidence of a person who knows which forms have to be signed twice and where to initial in the corner so a clerk doesn't bounce something back. The escrow officer, Marcia, had the tidy hands of someone who likes a good checklist. She slid papers across the table with a steady rhythm, reading out the key lines as if she were a calm metronome for my unruly heart. Warranty deed, she said. Real estate excise tax affidavit. This is the REIT. Disclosure acknowledgement. Wire instructions confirmation. And here. She tapped a signature block with my printed name. This one makes it official. I signed. I dated. Lydia checked. Kendra signed. Marcia smiled the way people smile when the part that can go wrong has gone right. My hands remembered how to be steady. The pen looked like every pen in every closing I've ever seen in a movie, like a prop that knows exactly where it belongs. There was a moment, the smallest of seconds, when I considered all the times I'd been the person in a fluorescent room saying, "This is going to hurt for a second," before I stuck a needle in someone's arm. This was that second. Paper is cleaner than blood, but it carries its own sting. At 10:47 a.m., Marcia said, "Congratulations," not like a balloon pop, but like a conclusion. She slipped the deed into a manila folder to be couriered to the Chelan County Auditor's office for recording. "Once it's stamped, it's public record. Your wire will hit as soon as we get confirmation." She looked at Kendra. "Possession is subject to occupants per the addendum." Kendra nodded. "We're on it." Outside, the Wenatchee sun had the flat honesty of noon. I stood on the curb with Lydia and Kendra and watched a FedEx man shoulder a package like he was used to carrying things heavier than paperwork. Lydia adjusted her glasses and said, "We'll get confirmation of recording this afternoon. I'll forward it. Then notice to quit. My office will coordinate with Kendra's counsel." "I want them to know it's done," I said, before I'd really decided to say it out loud. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was a desire for oxygen. I don't need to be the one who tells them. I faltered, because part of me did want to be the one, the part of me that had stood in my own bedroom like a thief while Cal tested the doorknob, the part of me that had listened to Ivy tell a deputy that I was unstable. "Never mind," I finished. "Do whatever is cleanest." "Cleanest," Lydia said, "is my favorite adverb." Kendra squeezed my shoulder. "Go get a real lunch. No hospital vending machine pretzels. We'll call you when the deed stamps." She slid into her car like the next file was already open in her head. I ate a sandwich at McGlynn's pub because it was close and the waitress had the kind of no-nonsense kindness that saves lives in small increments. My phone buzzed with a text from Pam. "Anything I should know?" I sent back, "Big change coming today. You'll see something on the door." Her response was a parade of lemon emojis and one heart. I ordered water instead of beer because the ER has taught me to respect how fast the day can turn from celebration to triage. At 2:06 p.m., Lydia forwarded the email from the auditor. Recording number, date, time. The deed was in the public record with my signature, Kendra's, and the stamp that might as well have said, "The play is over. Sets will now be struck." A minute later, a separate text thread lit up from a number I didn't recognize. Kendra's counsel. "Notice to quit 20 days posted, proof of service to follow." Attached was a photo Pam must have taken, the cabin door with a crisp sheet of legalese taped at eye level, and a second copy slid into a glassine envelope like a ritual. The wide, ridiculous tenants-only sign now looked like something taped to a toy house. When the notice went up, the performance began. It started online. Ivy posted a video to her followers in which she stood on the dock, chin set, sunlight turning her hair into a halo she hadn't earned. "Hey, friends," she said, camera too close, voice pitched to trembling righteous. So today, an abusive ex sold my home out from under me. She put air quotes around sold with the same hands I'd bandaged once when she cut herself opening a stubborn wine bottle. We have rights, and we're not going anywhere. Cal was in the background wearing sunglasses and a tank top, and the smirk of a man who learned civil discourse from comment sections. He slapped a palm on the notice like a sheriff in a western pinning a bounty. "Cute," he said, loud enough for the phone to pick up. "Let's see them try." I didn't reply. I didn't watch the comments. I let Lydia and Kendra's counsel chew through the parts of the law meant for chewing. But the thing about bullying is that it only knows 1 decibel. When it can't reach you on your phone, it looks for you in rooms. At 4:30, as I stood in the produce section of Safeway deciding between 2 identical heads of romaine, my phone lit with Ivy's ringtone, one I hadn't changed because I had not until now given myself permission to do that small mercy. "You're a monster," she said when I answered. No hello, no who is this. She never wasted the first line on courtesy. "You think this is over? You conned some contractor woman into money, and you think that buys you a life?" "It's over for me," I said, and surprised myself with how even my voice sounded. "You're not my problem anymore." "You think a deed is power?" she demanded. "You think paper means anything to people who actually build things with their hands?" In the background I heard laughter, the clink of bottles, music pressed to distortion. A party, of course. Cal threw parties the way some men throw punches, quickly, and to prove something. "We have a lease," she said. "We have the right to mediate. We have—" "You recorded a fraudulent memorandum," I said quietly, because people always tell the truth in the grocery store if you give them a bit of public privacy. "You staged a tendency to squat. You're going to learn what consequences are that don't come with applause." For a minute, I almost said the line my father gave me. "You are yours." But that line was for me, not for her. She laughed. It wasn't the stage laugh now. It was the short, ugly one she only had when the script had gone sideways. "I hope you like surprises," she said, and hung up. At 6:15, Pam texted, "They're throwing a tenants' rights BBQ. I wish I was making that up. There's a smoker on the porch and a banner. The banner, she sent a photo, had been painted in red on an old sheet. Homes not capital. The effect was less revolutionary than dorm room. In the comments below her photo, she wrote, "I'm staying on my porch to sip lemonade like a judgmental aunt." I pictured Ivy, who once made me turn the canoe around because she'd forgotten her SPF lip balm, clutching a solo cup and preaching mutual aid to a circle of people who had no idea how much of her was a mirror held up to whatever she thought they wanted to see. Cal would be doing the grill work because he liked the optics of men with tongs. He had probably told everybody in earshot that he knew the sheriff. Maybe he did. In small towns, everyone knows everyone, but knowing a man's name isn't the same thing as having a right. By 9, the photos stopped. The lake goes quiet by then, even in August, the sound carrying across the water so efficiently that someone laughing on a dock at the lookout can sound like they're standing on your steps. I fell asleep with my phone beside me on the couch because beds felt ceremonial and I didn't have the energy for ceremony. Sometime after midnight, it buzzed. "Pam again. Sorry to wake you." They turned off the porch light and I thought it was over, but there's a flashlight by the dock and I heard a saw. "I think they're messing with your—" Her correction came immediately. "Kendra's dock." I sat straight up, the kind of instantaneous body decision I make when a monitor starts screaming in Trauma 2. "Call the sheriff," I typed. "Right now." "Already did," she sent. "They said they're on their way." I called Kendra. She answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep switching to legal in an instant. "Civil standby," she said. "I'll call council and have them request it. Damage to property kicks this out of just a landlord-tenant issue land. Stay put." Staying put is not something I'm good at when something I love is being hurt. The cabin had been a gift. The dock was only boards. I knew that with the same part of my brain that knows a patient will scream, then sleep after a shoulder reduction. But I also knew how people like Cal make their point, by breaking the one thing that can be broken quickest, because it shows you they can reach you. I paced my living room until Pam's next text. Sheriff here. Flashing lights. They're backing off. I think the saw was just a bluff. They wanted us to see them working. The next morning, Kendra's counsel sent a formal request for a civil standby and a time for a locksmith to meet them at the cabin to rekey once the lawful notice period ran or a court order allowed entry for safety. Washington has careful rules around this. You don't just change locks on someone who might properly be a tenant. Kendra played it letter perfect, which is its own blunt force. A deputy scheduled the window, Friday at 10. The locksmith's name was Trevor, which made me think of a teenager until I met him outside the cabin and shook the hand of a 50-year-old man with forearms like old boat rope. I shouldn't have been there. I knew that. But Kendra hadn't stopped me from driving over to watch from Pam's porch as her judgmental Aunt Lemonade turned into full-on court balcony. I wore a baseball cap and sunglasses like anyone would care who I was. The deputy briefed Kendra's counsel at the end of the driveway, voice firm, not unkind. We're here to keep the peace. If entry is permitted by the court order you provided, we'll stand by. If there's a disagreement about what's a fixture and what's personal property, that's between you and the judge on another day. Understood? Understood, counsel said. He had a manila folder of copies the way people who are good at their jobs do. Everything you might need in triplicate, the corners square. Cal opened the door before anyone could knock, which was a power move and also saved Kendra's counsel from wasting a good knock. He filled the frame in that way some men do when they've decided a door is a stage. "Can I help you, boys?" he asked the deputy, even though one of the deputies was a woman and she arched an eyebrow in a way that made me like her immediately. "We're here under court order to allow the lawful owner access for inspection and to facilitate a key change," the deputy said. "You've been served with a notice. This is not a conversation about possession today. This is about safety and compliance." Ivy appeared behind Cal, mascara like armor. She held up a piece of paper and shook it, the paper's top edge flapping. "I have a temporary restraining order against her," she announced, pointing past the deputies, past counsel, past Kendra, as if she could find me by smell. "She's not allowed within 500 feet of me or my residence." "She's not here," the deputy said, which was technically true if you count across the street porches as not here. "And that order is not yet signed. It has a hearing date. We respect hearings." Ivy's mouth opened and closed. Cal tried a different tack. He produced, with the triumph of a magician pulling a dove from a sleeve, a sheaf of papers with his company's logo at the top. "Mechanics lien," he announced. "Filed this morning. $47,000 in improvements. You can't record a deed over an active lien." Kendra's counsel didn't even take the papers. "You can record anything," he said pleasantly. "It doesn't make it valid. Also, for a mechanics lien, you need a contract and pre-lien notices and actual work done. And you need to be a contractor licensed in good standing, which the Department of Labor and Industries says your company is not." He looked at the deputy. "We'll litigate if we must. For today, we're here to rekey with law enforcement present to keep the peace and to do an inspection for health and safety." Cal's jaw ticked. Ivy's face did that thing I knew too well, the shift from righteous to wounded to wrathful in the space of one breath. "You can have your little inspection," she spat, "but you're going to see what you did. You killed a home. You turned love into paperwork." The deputy nodded to Trevor, who approached with his toolkit like a man about to perform a symphony. He set to work on the deadbolt, calm and blunt, the way I crack open a chest tube tray. I watched his shoulders move. I watched Cal's fists unclench and clench. I watched Ivy pace with the clipped steps of an actress who believes she can make a director cut by walking fast enough. When the lock turned, the deputy stepped aside, and Kendra's counsel announced, in a voice for the record, that entry was being made for lawful purposes. He pushed the door inward. The smell hit him first. He jerked back as if he'd been pinched, then covered it with a cough. Even from Pam's porch across the gravel, it slid into my nose a second later, an unholy blend of rotting meat, sour milk, and something metallic. The deputies exchanged a look. Trevor swore softly. Kendra's mouth tightened. Cal crossed his arms like a man proud of a corpse he didn't have to bury. Ivy smiled a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You wanted your inspection," she said sweetly. "Go inspect." I knew that smell. Everyone in emergency medicine knows it. We smell it once in a hoarder's apartment or a summer power-out pantry, and it lives in our hair for a day. They'd salted the place with decay. Not just garbage, they'd made sure it would read as violation, as danger, as something a health department would frown at, even on a generous day. Pam's fingers found my wrist where I'd been gripping the back of her porch chair until my knuckles looked like hard candy. "Don't move," she whispered. "Let them see it. Let them document. Let them own it." I didn't move. I watched the deputy flick on her body camera. I watched Kendra's counsel pull a disposable mask from his pocket with the casualness of a man who's worked in a courthouse since 2020. I watched Kendra step to the threshold and stop like a diver, measuring the wall of water before she goes under. And then, from inside the cabin, beyond the stink and beyond the ruined order of my father's rooms, something rattled. A metallic clatter, not like a pan falling, not like a bottle rolling. It was a steady tapping rattle from the bedroom, like a loose vent grate lifted and set back down again. The deputy's hand went to her radio. Trevor glanced at the roofline as if checking for an animal. Kendra looked over her shoulder at the deputy. "Do you hear that?" she asked. The deputy nodded once and said, "Step back," as Ivy's smile widened into something feral, and the rattle shifted into a sound I hadn't heard since the night I stood in my own room clutching a deed. A window sliding, slow and deliberate, like someone who thinks the law only applies to doors. The sound of the window sliding jolted everyone in the doorway into the same animal posture I know from Code Blues. A stillness that's louder than motion. The deputy's hand went to her radio. The other deputy angled off the porch toward the side yard. Trevor froze with a pick in the lock like he'd suddenly realized this was less a house call and more a scene. Kendra's counsel took a step back to the gravel, a man removing himself from the splash radius without losing any dignity, and called over, "If someone's trying to exit, we're stepping out. We're not here to escalate." On Pam's porch, the lemonade glass sweated in her hand. "Back bedroom window," she whispered, as if I couldn't also map that sound in my bones. "It's the same sticky window I opened the night I stole my own deed back. Stiff, old, half-painted shut. You have to lift and slide, then bump the frame with your hip to get it to catch." The rattle was exactly that, a hip bumping a life that wasn't theirs. The female deputy moved like a person who knew the terrain. She circled along the side yard, hand up in a non-threatening warning. "Chelan County Sheriff," she called, firm, clear. "If you're exiting, step slowly into view with your hands visible." No hands. The rattle paused, then resumed with a jerkier rhythm. Ivy hadn't done the lifting with her legs. She'd yanked, and old wood always punishes a yank. Then a limb swung through, an arm, pale, with a bracelet I recognized, thin gold, with a tiny charm shaped like a leaf. I'd given it to her at Pike Place, impulsively, between a bunch of peonies and a stand selling cherries, back when buying something pretty felt like a way to say I see you. She was halfway out the window, ducking, one hand clutching a tote bag, bulging with what I couldn't see, because Cal stepped forward to block the deputy's line of sight, palms up like a referee who's also a stage manager. "Whoa," he said, "no need to go around the side of my property. You got the paper. You can do the inspection. But you don't need to go sneaking around like family photos are contraband." That window's opening from inside, the deputy said. Keep your hands where I can see them. He didn't. Not exactly. He did the male version of compliance, the kind that obeys with a thin layer of contempt. Hands, he said, and raised them slow, elbows out like a shrug. We're just living our life. The tote hit the dirt like a bag of bones. I heard the muffled clank of metal on wood, and then Ivy's face popped into view around Cal's shoulder, hair messy, mascara a little smeared. She gave the camera on the deputy's chest one of those looks, the kind that's half plea, half performance. We're packing a bag for a friend's baby, she said, instantly ready with a line. We were going to bring it to the car. We're not hiding. We're just trying to live. The deputy didn't argue. She bent, without looking away from Ivy, and towed the tote open. Out rolled a jewelry box that had belonged to my mother, a flat, velvet-lined thing with a cracked mirror in the lid, and my father's old Timex, the one I keep in the cedar chest because the sound of its loud tick once comforted me when the power went out. A Ziploc bag with my name in my father's handwriting. A small envelope stamped with Safe Deposit, Wenatchee Federal Savings, the kind of envelope banks used when you still filled out forms with pens on chains. Step back, the deputy said again, but softer now, because even a cop with a badge recognizes a talisman when she sees one. We're going to secure the inside. You can film from the porch. She flicked her eyes up at Kendra's counsel. Document this as items of clear separate property belonging to prior owner. We're not making a property call, but we'll record their location. Copy, counsel said, already snapping photos and narrating time, place, description in a calm cadence that reminded me of intubation notes. Ivy put her hands up like a martyr in a play that had been rehearsed once in a mirror and not at all with the rest of the cast. She's stalking me, she announced to the air, to Pam's porch, to my bones. She's always been unstable. I recorded a whole live last night about it. The deputy ignored her the way you ignore a child during a tantrum to keep from teaching the wrong lesson. She stepped into the house. The smell, God, the smell, pulled at her face and she stopped again, pulled a disposable mask from her pocket and looped it on in one practiced motion. Trevor swore under his breath, like a man remembering a bad job in August in a single wide with no AC. Kendra didn't move until the deputy said, Owner's rep can enter. She nodded, followed, lifted her phone, and started scanning the room with the slow, merciless eye of someone who has seen worse and also doesn't confuse worse with forever. I stayed on Pam's porch and felt like my ribs were a birdcage and the thing inside it had finally realized it was allowed to rattle the bars. My hands were steady because the ER had trained them, but my mouth was dry because nothing trains you for the way your past can be held hostage by people who think stories are toys. Don't go over there, Pam murmured, reading the tilt of my legs toward the gravel. Let the law make the next move. Eat a cracker. She pushed a sleeve of saltines into my palm, like a grandma at a wake. In the doorway, the deputy's voice came flat and official as she narrated to the camera. Entry hall cluttered with refuse, apparent raw meat in kitchen trash, heat on high. Despite exterior temps, it was an old squatter's trick. Turn the house into a stink to repel. In nursing, we call it a barrier method when you layer on gowns and gloves and masks. Here they'd built a barrier of smell to force a retreat, to turn anyone entering into a puking child. But bodies get used to everything except justice. The deputy kept going, calm, inexorable. From inside, another sound now, the steady thunk of a hall closet door hitting a box with each swing. Kendra's counsel. Documenting damage to door jamb. Note, appears deliberate. The deputy. No immediate hazards like gas leaks. Exit remains clear. And then Ivy made her mistake. She stepped off the porch and went for the tote. Not quick enough to be stealthy, not bold enough to be a clear grab. Just a messy lunge that announced I need this more than I need to pretend I don't. The deputy's partner moved, quick as a current. He put one hand up, one out. "Don't touch that," he said. "It's part of an active inspection." "This is mine," she snapped. "It's my watch. Cal gave it to me." "That's not true," I said, from across the gravel without meaning to speak at all. My voice went out into the day and hung there like laundry. "It's my father's." Cal spun, zeroing on the voice like a dull knife, finding a soft spot, and his face did that thing I've seen right before a punch. His eyes went small, his shoulders squared, his feet shifted to a stance. "There she is," he said, and took one step toward the road, like he could walk through the deputy's line and right into my life if he just flexed hard enough. He didn't get a second step. The deputy's hand came out and touched his chest with 2 fingertips, precise, firm. "Stop," she said. He stopped, not because he wanted to, but because the math of fighting a badge in front of a camera worked even in his head. He pivoted to bluster. "We're going to sue you all. You. He pointed at counsel, at Kendra, at the female deputy, who blinked like an owl and said, "Don't point at me again." Ivy stood with her hands open, suddenly without props, the performance glitching. Without a camera pointed at her by her own hand, without a chorus of comments telling her she was brave, she seemed smaller, a shadow that had to do her own lighting. She looked at me across the gravel, and for 1 second I saw the face she'd had the first time I ever saw her cry, the one that said, "I don't know how to apologize without losing." "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Not rage now, confusion. "Why are you so cruel?" The thing I wanted to say pressed against my tongue like a pill I wasn't ready to swallow. "Because you taught me how." I didn't say it. I said, "Because it's mine." And the deputy took the tote to the porch and wrote down each item, line by line, while Trevor finished the rekey and Kendra's counsel stapled forms into a neat sheaf. That made me think of discharge packets, parting gifts for people just trying to survive. When they finally left, door relocked, notice firmly taped, the smell contained behind new seals and a list of evidence, the deputies stood at the end of the driveway and did the last thing they're trained to do when the performance is over. They explained expectations as if they were recipes. "You have 20 days on the notice," the woman said. "You can respond in court. Do not damage the property. Do not remove fixtures. Don't make me come back because someone went through a window. Today was for safety. The rest goes to the judge." "We'll see you there," Cal sneered, like a bully who thinks the principal is a friend. Ivy lifted her phone again and went live on reflex, panning over the door like proof of persecution. Pam squeezed my hand before she went inside. "You did the right thing," she said. "You left. You let them drown in their own noise." I stood on the gravel a long time after that, listening to the sound of the lake and to the smaller, pettier sounds in my own chest, quieting down. That night, the court filed Kendra's unlawful detainer. The show cause hearing was set for the following Wednesday in Chelan County Superior Court. Lydia told me I didn't need to be there. Kendra's counsel would carry it. But I went anyway because I like to know the shape of the room where decisions get made about the places that made me. I sat on one of those hard benches that make you sit up straight. The ceiling was too high for a building this small, and the air had the citrus wipe smell of every court I've ever set foot in. Cal wore the same plaid shirt. Ivy wore a blazer over a tank top that said, "Housing is a human right." The judge wore patience like a robe. Kendra's counsel presented the chain: deed, notice, inspection, documentation of damage, officer reports. He spoke about health and safety, about property rights and process. He was careful not to make it sound like a soap opera because judges are allergic to soaps. He told a story with the facts, the way you teach a trainee to describe the wound, not the pain. Cal tried to argue that the lease he'd backdated made them tenants. The judge asked for the pre-lease notices required by RCW 60.04 for a contractor's lien, and for any rent payments proved by bank records. He had neither. Ivy tried a different tack, that we were domestic partners and that her sweat equity made her an equitable owner. Lydia's brick of filings, oh Lydia, was ready with photographs, affidavits, bank statements, and every piece of paper you'd need to prove a thing that never should have needed proving. In the end, the judge's words were simple. Writ of restitution granted. Sheriff to restore possession to the plaintiff forthwith. Defendant's assertions are unsupported by evidence. Any allegations of harassment belong in a different case. Cal's mouth opened and... Then the deputies flanking the door made their quiet presence felt without moving an inch. Ivy put a palm flat to her chest like her heart had just gotten a line reading it didn't like. The clerk stamped something that sounded like a final nail being set without drama. Outside, the sun fell on the courthouse steps with an impartial grace that made me feel stupid for thinking it might have opinions. The writ executed on Friday morning. Sheriff's deputies arrived with a locksmith and a mover who didn't ask questions and had seen it all. The deputy gave Ivy and Cal 10 minutes to pack essentials. The list was merciful and boring. Medicine, IDs, a bag of clothes. The mover stood with the long patience of men who've lifted other people's crises for a living. I watched from up the hill in Pam's yard. Her dog pressed warm against my shin, and I tried not to catalog what they chose to shove in a duffel over what they left to rot. They left the housing is a human right banner. They took the Bluetooth speaker. They left the cheap couch they'd dragged in. They took the copper pots that had been my mother's. The deputy stopped that one with a head shake and a finger aimed at the inventory sheet. "Not today," she said. "That's a fight for a different hour." In the last minute, Ivy bolted into the bedroom, and I saw the shape of her shoulders collapse into something pathetic and familiar. The posture of a person who tries to make herself small so the scene will seem bigger. The deputy followed, waited, then spoke quietly. Ivy came out with empty hands and a face that had returned to a kind of actress's calm. She looked around the room that had been mine, then ours, then mine again through the blunt force of process, and she said a line for me, though I was half a yard, half a life away. "You don't get happy from paper." What I could have said, "You never did the work." What I said instead was nothing, because I had learned the most dangerous lesson of my life, that I can choose silence without surrendering the floor. They left. The movers went in. The stink peeled out of the doorway like a thing glad to be released. Trevor pinned on a "Notice, locks changed" tag with a little flourish that might as well have been a bow. Kendra arrived an hour later with contractor masks and a team that turned chaos into neatly labeled piles. Donate, dump, document. The first window they opened let in a line of clean lake air that sliced the room into before and after. I put on gloves and helped with the smallest thing, gathering the fallen tacks from the corkboard by the kitchen, the one where my dad used to pin fishing licenses, and where Ivy had pinned a printout of an Audre Lorde quote she'd never actually lived. My hands wanted to be busy. My eyes wanted to avoid the places where anger would catch me by the throat. The burn mark on the cedar table, the gouge in the pine floor, the knife buried in the cutting board, like someone had gotten bored with throwing it into the dock post at night. In the bedroom, I found the cedar chest's latch bent. My father's letter was safe. My father's watch was back in the small inventory bag Kendra's counsel had secured, tagged with my name. Under the bed, snagged in a corner where dust bunnies go to die, I found something else, a thumb drive in a purple case, the kind given out free at a tech meetup with a logo half scraped off. On its side, in Ivy's handwriting, a label, lines. I'm not proud of how my stomach dropped. I could have tossed it in the trash bag labeled Misk Elec and let it disappear under a trampoline of broken chargers. Instead, I slipped it into my pocket and felt the shape of a roll I no longer wanted pressing against my thigh. Later, at Pam's kitchen table, with a borrowed laptop and a mug of coffee, I plugged it in. There were videos, not of me, not of us, of Ivy, alone, talking to her reflection on her phone. She'd been practicing, not just lines for shows, though those were there too, monologues she'd lifted from plays and Pinterest, and not just lies for police, though those too had rehearsals, down to the trembling pitch and the "I just want to de-escalate" that she'd deployed on cue. There were also very real conversations recorded without the other person knowing. You can always tell by the angle, the camera low, tilted, a bag or pocket vantage. I recognized Cal's voice and his laugh, hard and square as a porch post. In one clip he says, "Record that memorandum of interest thing. That'll spook any buyer. Then we've got leverage." In another, Ivy, "She's never going to fight. She's too decent. Worst case, the sheriff tells her to get a lawyer, and she goes back to work and cries into a pillow." Cal, "And then you do one of your crying videos, and everyone sends money." The contempt in his voice for her audience was surgical. In a third, rattier audio file, you could hear sawing, then Pam's voice faintly across the water. "You better not cut that, Doc." And Cal's mutter, "Just scare them." The last file wasn't video. It was a photo of the quitclaim deed they'd tried to forge with my name, a shaky penmanship attempt on a sheet downloaded from some online form shop and filled out with details that would have been funny if they weren't a felony. Cal had scrawled Elena, last name, gives cabin to Ivy, last name, as if the court would accept kindergarten as a style. The date was wrong. The parcel number had the last digit missing, but the intent was there like fingerprints on a window. I copied everything. I didn't send it to Ivy because I didn't need her to know what I knew. I sent it to Lydia, to Kendra's counsel, and, per their advice, to the county prosecutor's office with a bland subject line and a list of file names that read like a table of contents of their arrogance. Lydia called me that night with that particular gentle tone she uses for clients who've done something right that will still take time. "Thank you," she said. "This matters. There's a difference between being good at a performance and being good at crime. Those files show they're amateurs at the second. The dominoes didn't fall all at once. They never do outside of movies, but they fell." The Department of Labor and Industries sent Cal a notice of violation for unlicensed contracting with a fine that made his jaw clench in the mirror of his mugshot. The sheriff's office opened an investigation into the false filings. The county prosecutor charged Cal with malicious mischief and attempted filing of a false instrument. Ivy's attorney, yes, she suddenly had one, quietly approached Kendra's counsel about a civil agreement. She'd sign a release of all claims in exchange for a piece of furniture and a promise not to post anything else with Kendra's name in it. Kendra declined the part about promises. She didn't need a gag to feel safe. "Let her talk," she said. "She's better at making herself look bad than any lawyer could be." In Seattle, I went to work, which saved me in the only way I actually trust. A week after the writ, a kid came in after a bike versus car with a femur that looked like a set of chopsticks. His mother cried in that high, keening way of people who think they've chipped the world when really the world is just doing its normal breaking. I set IVs and tilted screens so she didn't have to watch the parts that would make her faint. I held the boy's hand as ortho pulled. I told him he was doing great and that sometimes being brave was just not biting anyone. When I got home, there were 3 DMs from strangers calling me a landlord ghoul, and one from someone who said their ex had tried the same squat, and did I have a lawyer's name. I gave Lydia's number. I walked to Molly Moon's and ate a cone on the curb like a teenager trying to figure out where to go after the movie. The city smelled like sugar and distant fried things. I slept. Ivy texted me once, at 2:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, because the hour when you run out of audience is when you reach back to the people who used to clap. "Do you remember the story about the woman at the solstice parade with all the flowers?" she wrote. "Do you remember how we decided we'd always be the people who held the bouquet together?" I stared at the screen a long time. I typed, "We were," and deleted it. I typed, "I don't remember," and deleted that too. I left it unanswered, because some silences aren't cruel, they're sutures. Kendra's renovation moved like a tide clock, slow, steady, ignorant of drama. The dumpster filled with the stink of a past, and then grew clean. The cedar breathed again. The dock, unsawed, intact, got a new plank here and there where Cal had hammered in a screw wrong and split the wood. Kendra is the kind of person whose superpower is completion. I watched her tick boxes on a clipboard, and for the first time in months I believed in the possibility that a place could be itself again. She refused to let me help beyond one afternoon when I scrubbed the interior of the windows and, in the streak-free glass, saw my face without the compliance of someone trying to pass a test. 2 weeks later, she called me with a tone that had no panic in it, just curiosity. "We found something under the dock," she said. "You should come." It was one of those late summer afternoons when Lake Chelan looks like it was poured yesterday. Clean and absurdly blue, patched with light like someone was shaking glitter in the sky. Kendra and Trevor had pried up a dockboard and pulled out a waterproof tackle box, gray and heavy, with a rusty hasp and an old sticker that said Husky 1997 in my father's blocky attempt at humor, since neither of us ever followed the Huskies. Trevor handed it to me with a reverence you'd reserve for ashes. "We thought it might be yours," he said. "Inside were things you hide when you trust boards more than banks. A small envelope of cash, my father's emergency money, 20s and a few hundreds, folded 4 times, his pocket knife engraved with his initials, and a folded sheet that made my throat close, because it was a cartoon he'd drawn of me at 10, holding a fish, the fish big as my torso, my grin too wide for my face. Behind that, tucked invisible against the bottom, a tiny Pelican case with a micro SD. Not my father's. He never once owned anything micro. Kendra raised an eyebrow. "Newer," she said. "Looks like squatters' leftovers. Advanced. We plugged it in on Pam's kitchen computer because that's my unofficial war room now." The footage captured a slice of night from a cheap motion cam stuck under the eaves. Cal kicking the dock post, Cal hauling the tackle box up, Ivy hissing, "Not that! Not that! It's sentimental!" Cal, "Everything's leverage," the box going back. It wasn't the smoking gun to end all trials. It was something better, a little knot of their intent. We sent it to Lydia and the prosecutor. The prosecutor sent back a line so dry it made me smile. "Noted for restitution hearing." Restitution. The word landed in my head like a level set on a shelf. Not revenge, balance. The day of Cal's plea, the courthouse hallway smelled like industrial cleaner and the hot metal of an August afternoon leaning into the windows. He took a deal because men like him always do when bluster hits a wall. Plea to malicious mischief, fine, probation, a suspended sentence that would spring like a trap if he so much as breathed wrong on someone else's lock. Ivy wasn't charged with anything more than civil nonsense, the kind that dies behind closed doors, in a conference room with a copier humming like a fridge. Her theater released a statement about community values that did not name her, which is a theatrical way of saying, "Go away." She vanished from my feed slowly, unfollowed herself into the digital woods. Kendra put the cabin back on the market in October. Breath-busting photos, cedar sharp and new, cathedral pine standing steady over a dock that had seen things and gotten over them. Her agent staged it with a plaid throw and a mug on the porch rail, the kind of touch that makes buyers imagine themselves waking up into someone else's morning. She asked if I wanted to walk through one last time before showings. I did. We stood in the doorway that no longer smelled like rot. Cathedral whispered its long evergreen whisper. The cedar chest was empty now. My father's watch was on my wrist, tick loud in a room that had learned silence. "Do you want to say goodbye?" Kendra asked. It felt like I already had, months ago, in a hotel room at Campbell's with my face turned to the window. But there was a smaller goodbye I owed myself, not to the boards and the windows and the glint of morning on the lake, but to the idea that the best parts of my life live in rooms other people can find on a map. I walked down to the dock. I set my palm against Cathedral's rough bark the way I always did. I took the letter from my father out of my pocket, read, "You are my best, and you are yours," and did not cry. The water carried a soft lap, the sound of a chest rising. Pam joined me. She gave me a lemon cookie she'd wrapped in wax paper because she is determined to be a Southern ant in a Washington body, and I ate it while we watched the light go gold on the mountain. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. "Selling it?" I said. "Yes and no. It was the safest place I ever had until it wasn't. I think maybe safe isn't a place. Maybe safe is a decision you keep making." She nodded. "And revenge?" "Revenge was paper," I said. "Paper and patience. Revenge was telling the truth to someone whose job is to listen. Revenge was no longer giving my best stories to people who think they can write my ending." I bought a small condo near Green Lake with my half of the proceeds. One big window, a ridiculous plant that listens to me when I talk to it, a flimsy balcony where the sun hits at 9 in the morning and makes the street look like possibility. I hung my father's cartoon of me with the fish in the kitchen where I burn toast. I work nights and come home and sit on the rug and feel my heart shift into a gear I finally recognize as mine. Sometimes I drive east when the mountain is out and let the road peel away the days. Sometimes I stop at Blueberry Hills like a pilgrimage and sit with pie and coffee and a book I don't read because the air is enough. I have not been back to the cabin since the day Kendra put the for sale sign up, but I check Redfin the way you check the vitals on a patient you've stabilized, not because you own them anymore, but because you learned their story and wish them more minutes. The last thing Ivy sent me, because of course there was a last thing, was a postcard of the Fremont Troll with the word "sorry" written on it in silver marker and no return address. I stood at my mailbox, a stack of circulars in one hand, the Troll's weird eyes staring up at me, and I realized that apology is like anesthesia, not always for the patient, often for the surgeon. I put the card in the recycling. I didn't save it for the cedar chest. I don't have a cedar chest anymore. I have a drawer where I keep my passport and my scrubs and the letter that makes my sternum feel like it's holding. And sometimes on nights when the city is too loud and the ER has put too many voices in my head, I go stand by Green Lake and watch the water hold the moonlight like a coin. I think about the girl on the dock with a glass of rosé that wasn't hers. I think about the man who thought a door frame was a border he could make into a country by standing in it. I think about the deputy's hands, the quiet way they made the space clear. I think about the sudden mercy of a stamp on a paper, of a judge's line read in a level voice, "Writ granted, restore possession." The lake in Seattle isn't Chelan, but water is water and night is night, and the sound of small waves against a shore is the same in every place where someone decides to stop letting other people narrate them. I don't rehearse anymore. I don't carry my keys like weapons. I don't count the brush strokes on the hills to make myself breathe. I breathe because I learned how to choose my own oxygen. When the wind is up, Green Lake breaks the moon into slivers, a handful of knives you can scatter with your palm. When it's still, it hands back one shining coin and makes you look yourself right in the eye. On those nights, I touch my father's watch and listen to its unembarrassed tick and remember the one true line that carried me from the cabin door to the clerk's desk and out again into a life I wrote myself. You are yours. The end.